Trained conservation scientist, his research is largely embedded within a interdisciplinary framework and is focused on explaining changes in forest and biodiversity over space and time through the lens of governance, state policies, and economic drivers. Currently, he is working towards designing methodological tools to measure the efficacy of conservation practices such as restoration and wildlife protection in India. He has over 15 years of field research experience from the eastern Himalayas and northeastern hills and has created impact on the ground by leading to the protection of several community forests in Meghalaya within a state community partnership model. In the near future, he hopes to create an impact by making significant contributions to the best practices discourse on conservation driven livelihoods and sustainability practice. Sir, may I request you please come to the dais and introduce all the other panel members and start the session. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Neetu. Yeah, thanks a lot, Neetu. Um, it's indeed a great privilege to be here among the esteemed guests that are present in this, also in the conference. And I believe the session is also, webcast live on YouTube. And so before starting the session, I would like to also call upon stage all our panelists. So as I call your name, kindly come on the stage and just occupy a chair of your choice. Anyone. Let's play some musical chairs. So I'll first like to call upon the stage Miss Jessie Namika Daro. Then Mr. Kinzong Bhutia, uh, Mr. Amba Jamil, and Mr. A.S. Munirul Zaman Khan. Just occupy any seat you. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So I have a very esteemed panel with me here today. I would, when I pose the question to the panel, I'll also try to introduce them before that, so that we don't start with a very monotonous, long introduction. Already Neetu has spent a lot of time introducing me, I feel. So let's look at the title of the panel first. So it's called Biodiversity-Based Livelihood and Income Opportunities in the Greater Eastern Himalayan Region. Safety nets on mainstream resources. Quite a mouthful, right? I would also, so before we start introducing the panel and start the discussion, let's just start with unpacking the title a bit. So we talk about livelihoods quite a lot, but what does livelihood actually mean? Does it mean just income? Does it mean just some kind of activities which leads to income, or does it mean something more? So actually, there are some very nice definitions of livelihood, and let's just start the panel with a good understanding of the livelihood, so that in the subsequent discussions we know what we are talking about and towards what discussion is going to focus on. So this is a definition by Chambers and Conway. It was published in one of the economic journals in 1991, and it says that a livelihood comprises the capabilities, assets, including both material and social resources, and activities required for the means of living. A livelihood is sustainable when it can cope with and recover from stress and shocks, and maintain or enhance its capabilities and assets both now and in the future, while not undermining the natural resource base. So, sorry. So just let's uh, think about this definition for a while, and because we have to cover a whole lot of issue in this panel, so I would like to start by asking Sri Kinzong Bhutia, and he is the co-founder of Kanchenjunga Conservation Committee. He is seated to my extreme left. He's based in Sikkim, India, and he has been working for nature conservation and has been promoting community-based ecotourism in the region. He has been also doing a lot of advocacy for appropriate policy changes in the general I mean, in issues around ecotourism in the mountains, and he's also founder member of the Zero Waste Himalaya group. And he has been actually working with the community in the place from where he come in Sikkim since 1996. So, Kinzongji, do you agree with the definition? An online audience, if you can't hear us, just type a comment, and we'll try to make sure that we are all audible.
Very much. But in the very huge, opportunity of Himalaya, where there's a diverse community and different livelihood challenges and opportunities are there. So the livelihood opportunity also means for us is to encourage people to do conservation. So that's why we took at tourism as one of the opportunity to people to understand conservation aspect of the importance of resources and also on livelihood. So tourism, community-based tourism for us is for people to encourage conservation of nature and culture.
So, in this definition, they talk about assets, right? A livelihood comprises the capabilities, assets, and activities required for means of living. So, using the nature-based tourism as an example, can you just tell our audience what do you see as the assets in that enterprise that you are trying to promote sustainable activities towards?
See, places like Northeast or Sikkim, where we have plentiful of natural resources, which is the asset for us. Uh, we had a small debate when Kanchenjunga National Park was considered as a mixed category World Heritage Site. So that they talk about tangible and intangible presence. So they talk about the culture need to be man-made asset. So we talk about the whole landscape is asset for us, which is culture, part of culture. The Mount Kanchenjunga is the culture. The whole landscape is the culture. So culture has been a big asset and the opportunities for earning livelihood, and which sustained sense of belongingness is also linked with the nature. So the conservation starts with this when the sustainability and sense of belongingness with your assets will be more sustainable.
Thanks a lot. I mean, that really lays the context of what we are trying to discuss. That when we talk about livelihoods, we are talking about assets. And what Kim Jong just told that it's culture, but if I want to further unpack it, uh, where does biodiversity feature in that culture?
Uh, since the landscape itself is the part of culture, so biodiversity is also a part of culture. So that's why the mountain is sustaining one of the major economy in Sikkim Himalaya, especially Darjeeling Hills also. So visitors visiting places like Changu Lake in Sikkim or Gurudungma Lake or Kechupuri Lake, these three lakes is a famous tourist destination where government of Sikkim has created a local sub government to collect fees. So the largest one lake collects about 35 lakhs per season as a environment management fees. They collect only 10 rupees. So which is lake sustaining many livelihood. Like from Gangtok itself, there's a one major visitors which visit. It's like one of the must visit area in Sikkim. So not only people are satisfied to see our natural asset, I feel the culture and the resources, but people are also earning livelihood. So, like Kanchenjunga National Park itself caters largest number of visitors in Northeast for trekking adventure. So a lot of expedition trekkings happens in that area in Northeast. So which is the largest number of tourist attracts because of the natural asset which we have. For that, for long-term sustainable, we are trying to educate community to how to do business because business is a very new intervention in Northeast culture because we always have a culture of giving only, not really doing entrepreneurship. So first is like the value of business. The other is like enhancing skill. So where you have, if you have a skill, you will earn more. So conventional tourism guide will get 1500 rupees. Now the export guides are charging 3500 to 5000 per day per person. It's a common a boy from rural uh, villages. Now they are asked their services to Arunachal Pradesh, Ladakh. So their livelihood opportunities also increases, and the season is also increased because June, July, August they go to Ladakh. October to December they come to Sikkim, and winter they come to Assam and Arunachal Pradesh, and as well as March to June they are in Arunachal. So this has given a broader the skill development has given bigger opportunity on livelihood.
Thanks a lot. So, very good points. And what he was pointing towards is also the income which people are deriving from biodiversity. He was talking about nature. So, how do we separate biodiversity as an asset, and how does nature varies from biodiversity? So, if you want to understand the concept further, just keep in mind that when we talk about biodiversity or bioresources, it encompasses the those elements of nature which have an origin in life, or a living origin. So the word bio encompasses the entire living part of the world, and there are also several abiotic or non-living components of nature which also has a lot of value. And one thing which is very very clear about our resources is they are all finite resources. They're not infinite. They also deplete over time. So there comes the issue of sustainability. How should we manage? At what rate should we exploit? And I think this is a very good time to introduce the person sitting right next to me on my left, Sri Amba Jamil. Amba is professionally trained as an environmental lawyer and development communicator. He is an acclaimed grassroots convener, trainer, and facilitator with experience in the Asia Pacific and South Asian region in areas of environmental education, development communication, rural development, community-based resource management, and evidence-based policy formulation. So, Amba, with all your experience of working with the development and the environment sector over the last, I think more than 20 years now, what do you think about these issues of aspirations, income, and the environment and the nature and biodiversity being a finite resource, and the sustainability issues that we are always talking in the larger threat of climate change looming over the world today?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And I know the chicken and the mutton might feel a little sleepy inside your stomach, but try to keep that under control. Well, I think the question relates to what actually is the challenge with regards to this in terms of aspirations. And aspirations, no doubt, are increasing as education facilities get better and better for people in the mountains. Younger children, younger generation are getting education that prepares them to go to the outside world, to go into the industrial modes of the economy rather than the agrarian mode of economy. So naturally, the aspirations are there to go out of the region rather than stay within. That is one thing about the aspiration. On the other hand, with the incoming of exposure to the world through internet and television, even the older generation are seeing things that are happening around the world, and they see things that they think they also need and require, and naturally they also wish to aspire for more economic income. But to just think and leave it at that would be unfair, because if you really engage in communication with the elderly generation, and if you really engage with the younger generation that are living in the rural areas and depending on natural resources that exist within, many of them do feel deep inside that the loss of intergenerational knowledge, the loss of our dependence on natural resources, the loss of so many heritage seed systems, all this are really, really getting very painful. They're realizing that even as we aspire for the higher Western education, every day there's a library burning down in the form of an older man dying and an older woman dying. We're losing out our language, we're losing out. So there's a lot of struggle that people are going through right now, and a real transition where they're caught between the cash economy and social capital economy, if I may call so, where communities would really work together and do things together. And right now, the system is such that they are given crops where they have to compete with one another rather than to work together. So those are the issues with regard to aspirations and challenges.
Just hold that thought for a while because I'm going to come back to you very soon. But you mentioned that we are also losing libraries, living libraries. With each passing day, as a person just passes on to God knows where. I mean, I don't know even God is there or not. But just uh, so the fact is that whenever we talk about biodiversity-based livelihoods, one inherent characteristic of that livelihood or any kind of enterprise which deals with biodiversity, uh, which is not cultivated, which comes from the wild forests and our natural environment, is that they are also used through very deep local traditional ecological knowledge. And today in the morning panel, they were also talking about the intellectual property rights. And that's where the issue of traditional ecological knowledge becomes very critical because it is through traditional ecological knowledge that we know which biodiversity to use, when to use, how to use, and how much to use also, which also leads to the sustainability question. So there, I would like to bring in Jessie Namnika Daru. She is a human and institutional specialist at Aranyak Foundation, and she has been employed in the conservation-based development sector for over a decade. She is a truly passionate environmental conservationist who believes in getting to the root of any issue and engaging in planning and designing targeted solutions to solve the problem most effectively. She has achieved her goals with the main focus on effective communication to engage with the local communities. And and as an aside, which is something which is not mentioned in her profile, but which I found most interesting, and I was most thrilled to know when I met her today itself, is that she is in fact from the Garo community, a community which is shared by both Bangladesh and India. And my PhD research was initially supposed to happen in Garo Hills, which is part of the Meghalaya state in India. So I was really thrilled to meet, and Jessie was also talking to me about how, growing up as a kid within her community, she had known to use several of the biodiversity which is occurring in the wild. So, Jessie, can you elaborate a bit on the traditional ecological knowledge that people who live around biodiversity inherently possesses, and the kind of changes that you have seen through your life so far?
Mithila, thank you, Rajkamal, and I would like to thank the STEM organizers for giving me the floor. Um, when I was young, not when I was young, but when my parents were younger, they had this. They used to collect seeds and forage mushrooms and seeds from the forest, but they would never over collect. They would ensure that they would leave some of the herbs, the mushrooms in there so that they can come over and collect it again in the next season or the next week. Um, what I also heard from my parents, and what I also heard from my parents is that they would also ensure that they have collected the better seeds to sow. If they find that some of their neighbors have the better quality seeds, better quality crops, they would collect sow from them, and they would never go for exotic species, and they would hold on to it for next season, and they would pass on this for the next generations and for the next season. But as I grew up in a city and I never saw these things. So I agree, uh, as the other parents already said, that we are losing a lot of knowledge, ecological knowledge, and we are also losing the knowledge that are related to biodiversity. biodiversity. And nowadays, what I face is that in my village and also in my workplace is that because of the expansion of commercial crops, we are losing this knowledge and we're also losing these seeds and everything.
Thanks, Jesse. So, So we are losing things at rapid scale, not just like the place from where biodiversity is coming, but because of the lifestyle changes that Amba so eloquently captured. People want better lives, move to cities. So it's not just people who just passes on, but also this movement from one place to another also leads to the loss of knowledge because such knowledge is very experiential. But apart from these social, economic forces which are driving many of the changes in the biodiversity which we see today, particularly with regards to their linkage with the people, another threat is looming large. And as we have seen over the last 1.5 days, most of the discussions have centered around climate change. And it is very important for us to understand this linkage that when we are talking about biodiversity, livelihoods, sustainability issues, we can't ignore climate change too. And who better than Sri Abu Sadat Muniru Zaman Khan, who is the program head of climate change program of BRAC Bangladesh. BRAC is well known globally for the kind of amazing work that they are doing. And Mr. Munir Khan actually leads and manages BRAC's local adaptation actions on ground. His area of expertise encompasses management, strategic decision making, planning, research, and annual operational activities. Mr. Khan has established himself as a development practitioner with solid knowledge of adaptation action over the last 20 years through academic engagements and hands on project implementation on a national as well as international scale. Mr. Khan previously worked at the UNDP, Dhaka, and Bangkok, IUCN Bangladesh, and of course BRAC University, and has accomplished several development projects and contributed to important research works. So, Mr. Khan, let me ask you one question. That when we talk about biodiversity-based livelihoods, and when we also know that climate change is looming all over us, what role do you see this biodiversity and the linked livelihoods playing in view of climate change, the different issues that we are talking about during the last 1.5 days, and over many days, to be honest, like adaptation, mitigation, or other kind of issues related to climate change, the impacts and all.
I'm not sure where I should start to give you the actual answer because in front of me, Dr. Khairul Alam is sitting. I learned a lot in my life. And brag, you know, I don't know, sometimes we call it NGO, sometimes. But what we are doing, basically, brag started the climate change activities in the inception. But as a climate change program, we started our journey in 2019. And when we started our journey, we decided we should calculate our carbon footprint. We know what is our carbon footprint. After that, we are thinking how to offsetting this carbon. Then I learned a lot from Khairul Bhai, and he gave me some ideas what is going on in Chittagong Hillcrest, community-based forestry. But in the plainland, like 50 years back, we have also community-based forestry in the village. One particular area we always conserve for the biodiversity as well as for the benefit for the poor people. That is already gone. From that perspective, we are trying to accommodate both concepts and we come up with the idea which we are telling that Amar Bon, which means my forest. We have, right now, we have more than 200 my forest in different parts of Bangladesh, altogether around 25 hectares of land, and 3 different types of forest, like a tree species we plant. One is fruit tree, timber tree, and also medicinal plants. At the same time, we are doing intercropping in between. We always choose the fallow land which is never used for other purposes. So now, if you go and see that small patch, one day it will be a big forest because we have a contract that we cannot cut down this tree next 15 years, 20 years. In between, we are providing all kinds of support. It's a grant, we are providing grant. But now people are exciting because 1 or 2 years later, they are getting mango and other fruits from that. Before that, they never got it from this land. Now, like everybody loves plant, basically. But this is some kind of mitigation activity, but we are getting adaptation benefit. So this year, we are also getting requests from the community, and we have a plan to expand around 500 plots, different parts of the Bangladesh. But again, in our mind that we have to mitigate something because last 30 years we lost like 4 million hectares of forest land due to different degradation. And also, if you remember the report from World Bank 2018, they say that 4 districts, like 3 districts from Chittagong Hill Tracts and one is Cox's Bazar, because of the degradation, the highest temperature and rainfall variability observed. So it is really, really threatening because we are the top 7 climate vulnerable countries. So we have to consider to plant more plants and at the same time keep the biodiversity alive because this mitigation activity will help us to do more adaptation activity.
Thanks a lot. I think his uh, his observations again drew out many of the issues which we often don't talk about when we talk about biodiversity based livelihoods particularly. And one of the most interesting things for me was this issue of um, the fallow land that you mentioned. So when we talk about restoration, which is also a overarching theme during this conference, when we talk about biodiversity or biodiversity, the places where biodiversity comes from, often what we miss is the tenure. So, for example, Saurav yesterday, when he was in his inaugural address, he was showing a patch of land which they are mobilizing to plant a lot of trees to protect some of the erosion that is happening due to the floods in Brahmaputra, or one of the tributaries of Brahmaputra to be specific, in Assam, India. But who does that land belong to? Whom does biodiversity belong to, for example? Is it a privately owned resource by people? The bird that you see flying outside, does it belong to everyone? If I want, can I just go and kill that bird and use it for any kind of activity that I want? Or the trees that we see on the road, which is again a public property, whom does that tree belong to? So the issue of tenure becomes really important because it's also a very complex one, and most of us who work on biodiversity related issues have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis. So here again, I would like to come to Kinzong first, and based on his experience of working in the Eastern Himalayan region, on also which this whole Naturenomics forum is focusing on, your activities focuses a lot on the mountains, on the forests in the mountains. Can you talk about what kind of tenurial issues you see there? Do you have any problems in accessing some of these areas for the resources that you are looking for, or even conducting tourism also, which is some kind of a biodiversity-based enterprise for livelihoods and income?
In case of Sikkim, is a little bit unique and different other than northeastern part, because in other part of northeast, 80 to 90% of forest is belong to private holders or private forest. We in Sikkim, 80% is belongs to the government. Only 20% is private holding. Under that also only 11% is a cultivable land. So that is productive land, and with this we have a major demand of Indian defense presence because of China border. So a lot of infrastructure development required, army settlements, and we not only share border between China, we also share with Nepal and Bhutan. So the demand of land itself is one of the major challenge for developmental activities for the security purpose. So when the security purpose or security terms comes in India, so most of our laws, regulation, the act, rights of traditional rights or tribal rights are not really considered that much important. So for this, like we have challenges, and with that, like 80%, like a lot of forest resources comes under forest department. So, when there's a forest department, access rights are very limited. Although in paper you'll see there's a creation of JMCs, Joint Management Forest Committees or Eco-Development Committees. There are PSS called Pokri Samachal Samitis. These are wetland committees. Nature, sharing of nature resources is very challenging in Sikkim. Especially they talk about reserve forests. Reserve forest is like all protected. Sanctuaries and national parks are more, harsher to access natural resources. So that's why we have diverted our resource exploitation to tourism, which talks about non-activity economy through the tourism. So that's why we have uh, created a lot of tourism spots, be it inside a national park or protected area or reserve forest. So private lands are very limited. So that's why resource extraction is challenged. So that's why we get more economic opportunity activities through tourism. So maybe for Northeast, it's different. So where they can design their own private activities of forest-based activities also, and even like NTFPs, extracting NTFPs also against the law. So these are, I think, like challenges. But if you see in other ways like river belts, we have lot of resources which is in terms of quarry, sand, stones, pebbles. So these have huge demand of for the developmental projects like Indian government grave ones, all these department road and bridges, construction buildings, private constructions. This is in very high demand, where we have very strong conflict between the industry coming over and taking over all machines work, extracting resources in a huge way, where the non-organized sectors are getting less business because now JCB is taking your stone with three bucket, it will fill one truck. For human activities for poor people who cannot afford JCBs, it takes about 4 to 5 hours. So that's how the competition with technology is also challenging because for the non-organized sector.
Thanks, Kinzong. So again, two new issues came up. One is you mentioned about rivers. So when we talk about forest also has a lot of streams, rivers, and for those who might have read the note of the panel, so we are not just going to talk about biodiversity or the bioresources which just comes from river, but also from other ecosystems like grasslands, for example, or wetlands, for example, rivers, for example. Sri Ambaji, like, can you elaborate a bit on some of the wild biodiversity that is widely used by people, contributes to economy in a big way, which comes from these different kind of, once again, common resources like wetlands, rivers, grasslands.
Well, to begin with, I must admit that I have not worked in wetland ecosystems or riverine ecosystems, so I will not talk on that. But when it comes to issues of common property regimes and resources, especially up in the mountains, people have been talking about the tragedy of the commons. But I think we need to turn this narrative around. There's a lot of opportunity of the commons, and the common property areas are real opportunity areas where we can really go into issues of rewilding, issues of community-driven initiatives. And so if you look at it from that perspective, um, the issue here is common property tenures are so complex. There's so layers within layers within layers within layers. In the northeast, yes, we have the six scheduled areas, which are special constitutional areas that provide land tenure to the communities. Uh, but again, when you say who is the community, is it the village as a whole, or is it the clans within the village, or is it the kinship group within the village, or is it a group of brothers who become the community? So again, there's so many layers, and everybody can easily claim that it is community land. And I think that's where we need to planners and development planners as well as policy planners. We need to really understand what are the types of interventions we're designing, even for community land. What type of community lands? Because again, we need to look at what are the institutions that exist that manages such community lands, and many of these institutions are again threatened or diluted in many ways because of so many modern interventions that are coming in through different schemes and programs of the government, and therefore the dependence of these people who are the custodians of the government property regimes have been indirectly reduced. Their dependence on the local biodiversity has been reduced to such a great level, in the sense rice is coming through the PDS systems, other food and vegetables are coming in through so many improved transportation and marketing systems that people, and then the improved health systems have again made sure that people have to depend lesser on traditional healing systems. And so all these challenges are there. But on the other hand, there continues to be this whole uh, realization that there is the opportunity for the community resources that exist. For example, during the COVID, it was the communities in the rural areas that were feeding people in urban areas. Communities from rural areas were the ones who were plucking, gathering, whether it's cultivated or uncultivated food crops and fruits and vegetables, and taking it to the urban centers and areas and say, come and get whatever you want. So the dependence on that. In Meghalaya and in Nagaland, through another organization that I've engaged with, we did a study during the pandemic, looking at the food extreme poverty levels, and we gave the data to the FAO, and the FAO sent us back the data saying that the poverty, there was no case of extreme poverty at all in these regions. Number two, the level of poverty that these regions seem to have faced was medium, and even that medium was at a higher level of poverty that can be described as in the high Western economies where they would consider that as poverty. So you see, on one hand, cash poor but resource rich, and I think that is really the opportunity that we need to be talking about.
Thanks. So I'll come back to you again. Actually, so you said that most of the ownership over biodiversity comes automatically because there is some right or ownership over land. Uh, but do you think biodiversity is something that can be owned by a community or an individual?
I think you should not mix up those two concepts. One is the ownership of the land, as in legal tenure systems and mechanisms, as provided by the legal system. So, from that perspective, the territory is owned or registered or with somebody else. But the food and the water and the air and the birds that flow through it, I don't think anybody can claim its ownership over that. And there is no legal regime that allows anybody to even claim it. So that's of course no.
Thanks. So that is very important to understand. That therefore biodiversity regulation and the policies that helps us maintain it or regulates its use over time are controlled at multiple levels. So at national level or at state level, these are governed by the national and state policies, whereas at international level, it is governed by certain international acts or some kind of a treaty or something like that. So, Monir Khan, again, I'll come back to you because Amba Jamir like very humbly claimed that he doesn't know much about the aquatic ecosystem, even though I know he does. But I'll because you belong to a riparian country. Bangladesh is economy is hugely fueled by riparian economy or the riparian resources, which includes a lot of wetlands also. And they also share boundaries. So these are not something which is contained within the territory of one country, or it can span multiple countries. If you take the example of Brahmaputra, Padma, Meghna, and all. So how do you see the biodiversity which flows through these multiple countries, through these complex ecological and environmental pathways, being regulated at local level as well as at state, national, and international level?
Uh, Thank you so much. Because yes, our northeastern part is really famous for we call how which is around 40 hours there, and it's a some kind of Sosa type land where that during um monsoon and also winter sometimes it's covered with water. Yes, I think Karibai also agree with me. 50 years back, we have swamp forest over there. Some different wetland species also, like swamp deer also. We have found, but now it's according to IUCN ratings, it's completely extinct. But because of fuel, they extract most of that swamp forest. Now there is some of the patch you can find. That's why people go to Ratagud. It's a very famous tourist spot. But again, sometimes we started some of the plantation activity from the forest department and from the NGO sector also. But the problem is that people's behavior, because sometimes it's very difficult to aware people why this plant is good for our life. It's only for human life? I don't think so. It's for other species also, like fish. They need some tree because of the big fish. For their growth, they need this tree. We are learning. Still, we have more research to understand this ecology. Sometimes we know the Sundarbans about, but we don't have that much of information in the wetland, the diversity, that ecology. I read in one paper that Veturi, he mentioned in his that theory, the river has a life. So if you consider that life, means different kind of species. More species means more life, and that river has to have enough water. Water is not for the human being. At the same time, nature needs that water. This year, it's a different kind of situation we have faced in our house because of some of the infrastructure. Sometimes we don't understand what kind of infrastructure we need over there. Farmers, they lost their huge crop production. They lost in the field, they lost in the house. Because last 120 years, this is completely a different kind of life. So we have to understand the climate change also, because there is a very close relationship with that, the rainfall variability as well as the ecosystem. So if we learn more about the system, we can protect the species more, which is good for humanity.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Munir. So coming to you, Jesse, now again. So what do you think? Like Mr. Munir was pointing out towards some of the threats that are driving some of the depletion of the resources around wetlands, and the kind of impacts that it causes, which kind of flows into other kind of production systems, agriculture, or uh, say aquaculture and all. So you have been working with a lot of forest dependent communities. So again, like coming back to this question of regulation and the policies which govern the regulation of some of these natural uh, uncultivated resources that people depend on, particularly from the our natural areas. What does your experience say? Are the regulations followed on the ground? Um
I had the privilege of working with the Howard areas. We were working with the community living in the Howard areas. We convinced them to conserve the Howard forest for about 3 years. But what happened after 3 years was that, like my other panel members already said, the community does not own that Howard land. So what happened after 3 years is that when the trees grew, the what the monetary value of the trees grew. So after a while, some people who are privileged and who are really privileged enough, they came, they cut it and took it away from my community, the community I was working with. So even though there are policies and guidelines, and there are people working for that, like we could not stop it. So these things are going on. Uh, they also in Chittagong hill tracks as well, because the community educated and they do not have like more resources and they do not have more power. We convince them, we talk with them to conserve the biodiversity, the forest, and everything. But after a while, like when we have to come back, or after a while when the bioresources they become more valuable, um, they grab the attention and the eye of other powerful people and they would come and extract it. Uh, at that time, like after some while, it does not remain as biodiversity is everyone's. When the time for harvesting or extraction comes, it's always the powerful people who take it away and they wipe away, they reap all the benefits from there. That's what my
Thanks, Jesse. I've raised some very, very important issues when it comes to the arena of common resources like biodiversity. Uh, and I'll come back to you again, Amba. I think because it links nicely to what you were trying to say earlier also. Uh, and I'll ask you a simple question. So, why does policies which govern the say use or protection of the natural resources doesn't work on the ground? And you have had a lot of experience of working in the Northeast. So, kindly share with our audience like your experience there.
I think the biggest challenge is policies are often made looking at a macro perspective, forgetting that to implement the policy, you need to also have instruments and institutions and financing and capacities and skills to ensure that policies are being done. That doesn't happen. Policies are very conveniently made on pieces of paper, kept there, and said we have a policy. That's one. Number two, many of these policies at state and country levels are not evidence based. And also, it's not fed by appropriate data that is consistent and realistic. So, a lot of these policies again tend to be based on typical physical targets and financial targets and blah. Not saying that policymakers are poor or bad, but somehow that seems to be the reality here. The real policies are policies which communities make at community levels. If a village decides that we shall do this, if a village panchayat decides that we shall do this, that, my friends, is a real policy. Unfortunately, that is not even discussed as policies. They just discuss as decisions of this and that. But those are the real policies of real resource managers living real time based on lived experiences and hardcore evidences. And I think there needs to be a real meeting of the different schools of influencers or stakeholders, including academia and researchers, who needs to really bridge this gap along with common policymakers.
Thanks a lot. I mean, decentralization of policies is something that we have been always discussing about, particularly in the context of how people use biodiversity, where do they use, because the knowledge is also tied with it. And when we talk about conservation of biodiversity or conservation of natural resources, these are very, very place based. These are very, very local. The issues are local. And this disparity in scale between who frames the policy and where the policies are formed is a big policy bottleneck that we have often faced, and which is one of the main reasons why policy often don't work on the ground. So now all of us are working in the arena of biodiversity and how biodiversity drives the livelihoods of people. And almost all of us are from the greater Eastern Himalayan region, which includes the rivers which drain the plains of Bangladesh and Assam. So, if you remember the title of the panel, I'll come back to it once again because we can't miss it. So the subtitle of the panel was whether biodiversity-based livelihoods are safety nets or mainstream resources. So I'd like each of our panel members to take 1 minute each and answer this question. I'll start with myself. I feel they are mainstream resources.
No, okay.
See, biodiversity resources for state like Sikkim or Arunachal Pradesh or small pockets, it's really need to have a special provision or recognition in the policy itself where our local issues are highlighted within space. So that's why I agree with you. And I also want to add that Mr. Ambas has talked about that local self-government empowering for management resources. We utilize a lot of ground summit in Prithviraj in Sikkim. So we make our own regulation to do biodiversity management and be it or leakage of economic leakage of tourism. So many places you see a lot of tourists visiting, but economically they are not flourished because there's a lot of leakage of resources and manpower. So the Gram Sabha, we use a platform to make small policy changes. So this could be utilized in Sikkim itself. In the North Sikkim, there is local self-government. Even they control like which part of the month, which date they will start grazing in AB part. So it's council will decide because they know the area, not the forest department. So that's how recognizing traditional culture is more important and also giving space in making regulation or policies where we don't have this. So that's why we encourage people to do micro planning for planning themselves for 5 years, 10 years plan and present in Gram Sabha through civil society or individual groups. So that's how we work because our state was the first to ban plastic bags, poly bags. So now we have banned below 2 liters mineral water. So it's not allowed whether for tourists or for local also. And this you need to have political will also, not the civil society or bureaucrats. It's just more of changing different policies, the political will. So our first minister was really impressed with this. So he didn't thought of what are the pros and cons. He says for the benefit of the state, he bans the water below 2 liters. So that's why mainstream is the, I think like the approach we should go through.
I think that's a very tricky question. Easiest way to say is see the mainstream resources, but I think issues of biodiversity are not just either this or either that. It's more complex than that, and the way it may be a mainstream respect from a mainstream resource, but for the community, it's a safety net in so many different perspectives. Starting with disaster risk reduction in the context of climate change and different weather patterns and failing crops, it is a safety net for the community if you look at it in the shorter term, but in the larger perspective, of course, it's mainstream resource.
Wow, it's again another challenging question because we have many policies, all the policies for partner safety. I'm going to tell you one story. I was with IUCN and we started a project under our community based management project back in 2002. And in that meeting, the Prime Minister, he asked, who owns this wetland? We found 22 different ministries and departments. They said everybody owns it. So how we can, because water ministry said there is water, so we are responsible. Agriculture ministry, yes, we do. There is many rice fields. Water board said it's our property. Land said this is their property. Livestock said that this is their property. So that is the challenge. So in that case, how to ensure the safety? We have good policies, but again, we have to decide who is the guardian of that common property resources.
I would like to go with Amba, with what Amba said. But it's a really tricky question. Like, if you look at the micro level, it's a safety net for all the communities, the small communities. But if you look at the bigger picture, it's a mainstream source of livelihood for everyone. However, since there are so many stakeholders, I think that for all the stakeholders need to come together to come to a common ground, to find a common goal, like what we actually want to do, and then create a policy. It is only then we can ensure that the livelihood of everyone is rightfully.
Thanks everyone. So we have a consensus here that it's mainstream with the qualification that Amba rightly made that at many times when the resources become sparse or the market chains fail, like COVID showed us, it can also become very critical safety nets. Um, we don't want to. So we have covered a lot of issues, and it seems like everything is like in a very bad situation. Biodiversity is depleting rapidly. People's dependence on biodiversity is increasing over time. Agriculture is failing. Water is getting polluted. So the resource base is getting polluted or depleted. What about the future? Let's talk. I mean, I think as the last point which I want everyone to make is what does each of you, based on your personal knowledge, the ground knowledge, and what you are seeing all around you, the conversations happening, the deliberations happening, uh, where do the future lie in terms of the biodiversity of the greater Eastern Himalayan region and the people who are dependent on them for either mainstream livelihoods or safety nets?
I forgot the what was your see a very good management uh, is needed, and also we are on the terrain that most of the things is not done by us, but we are given responsibility to hold all the problems most of the time. The water, which is rely in mountains, so which feeds from Sikkim to High Tibet to Bangladesh. So many times, like the consequences that we are facing is so rapid that uh, we forgot climate change. We are just working with the adaptation. So that is the one of the major demand for us. So we don't have space and time to really think and do research. And now our villages want that changes are happening in front of eyes. So we are in such a interesting era that being a very young also by age, but I see our rivers are drying in front of us. That's the situation. So that is a situation very alarming. But this is happening in small place. Our boys are not listened properly. So when you talk about our stream has died, this stream is not. There's no important. You go to the other bigger stream to feed the water. So we are just changing our shifting adaptation. So that's why like biodiversity loss is a big challenge for us. And and we will be, I think, one of the major sufferers because agriculture-wise we are not productive. Because the time which will take to harvest from seed to the fruit, it's itself is a challenge for us. And uh, I can grow vegetable to get down to the market. The cost of vegetable will be 3 times higher in the transportation. So this is also a problem because we cannot rely on cash crop also. And COVID has taught us, like, when we thought that tourism is the ultimate hero for economy in mountain, but suddenly we realize it's the zero also because it doesn't give anything if you have such kind of environment. So now we are again thinking to go back to the biodiversity, agriculture. So with this, there's a lot of gap in policy where India is a huge country. Policies are not made for the small, cluster level people or community. So that's why I say, biodiversity loss is very alarming for us. So many research happens. Research are dead in a table, in terms of, like, sometimes they don't get platform. So sometimes scientists are very greedy. They will get, my paper will come in international paper. If it doesn't come within 2 3 years, whole challenge with us is different. So that's why I strongly advocate for research into action. At least immediately the information need to be shared with the community so we prepare ourselves. It's not that it goes to the international journal, it comes to the national, then it comes to my village is like we are already finished. So that is my conclusion.
I think that we all are aware of conserving the biodiversity and we all want to conserve biodiversity. But the problem is that we don't have that good linkage with different levels of stakeholders. So what I agree with King Zunda, like what we need to do is we need more scientists with the practitioners, and we also need the policymakers, and not just that. We also need to listen to the voice of the grassroots level people. By combining all these stakeholders, we need to come up with a policy, and we need to come with this policy like really fast, not wait for like 5 years or 10 years for it to take effect. I think that if we do that, we can save our biodiversity and also our livelihood. Thank you.
So one vote for bright future, one not so bright future. So
I'm going back to 50 years back again. Just think 50 years back, what you will see or watch in your drawing room. Probably one, like skiing for deer or tiger or cheetahs, or your grandfather killed one tiger and take photo with that. It is not possible this time. This generation, young generation, they have different kind of attitude. They love the nature. They love wildlife. They also pay money to save the polar bear as well as panda. So this young generation, I'm very much optimistic. They will conserve our nature for sure.
Amba, you have the.
So many things in my mind that I don't know.
But you have to be very brief.
Yeah, I think that it's both bleak and prosperous in terms of bio perspective, in terms of the future as nature-based solutions. I think it's really, really bright. But in terms of the institutions that are managing the local resources, in terms of the people's dependence on it, it's getting away. Knowledge systems are dying down. Knowledge keepers are reducing. Heritage seats are getting lost. It's also a big threat, and the development impact that is there. So it's really scary on one hand, at the same time very, very exciting.
Thanks a lot. So we have like a balanced house, but I will tilt this side slightly to my right because, like, I completely agree with what Moni told. That I think the key lies in the generation ahead of us, and like Moni told that it's not possible to kill and pose with a tiger anymore. I think in the future it also won't be. People will be more understanding towards the people who depend directly on biodiversity, particularly the poor and marginalized people who live with the biodiversity day and night, 365 days a year, face all the challenges that biodiversity brings in their lives, but also derive a lot of income, livelihood, and other benefits from biodiversity. So they have learned to live with it, and we will grow more compassion, more empathy towards such communities, and our policymakers will also become more open to hear their views on how to manage their resources in a more effective way. So I think these are some good notes to end the panel, and I thank all my panelists for having such a wonderful discussion today on many complex issues. But we managed to cover quite a whole lot of issues today, and we have to thank Balipara Foundation for bringing us all together in this wonderful location, and the Independent University of Bangladesh for providing excellent um, the venue and the hosting and the warmth with which they have welcomed us, and of course the state of Bangladesh for being so warm to us right since the time we landed in the airport. And till now we have been amazed. Thanks a lot, everyone, for your patience, and I hope we are going to enjoy the next panel even more than this. Thanks a lot.